the Steelers were entering an important 2023 as they were hoping the quarterback they drafted in 2022, Kenny Pickett, would take the next step in his year 2 after a decent half year as a rookie. When I say half year, well, because, we had Mitch Trubisky as the MVP starting. MVP. No, MVP. Nickelodeon Valuable Player. But then he got replaced by the picket line, Kenny Pickett. So anyway, last offseason, they mainly used the draft to get Pickett some needed help. But even then, it was going to be on Pickett himself as to whether or not he could develop into the next quarterback the Steelers have needed since Big Ben Roethlisberger. So it was going to be on a big season for Kenny Pickett to prove if he could be the guy the Steelers are looking for. So when you look at the positives for the Pittsburgh Steelers this season, obviously you look at TJ Watt. You get another all-pro season from him. When you look at Watt, he had another career year, setting a new franchise sack record of 81.5 sacks and leading the league once again for the second time in 3 years with 19 sacks. He's TJ Watt, man. Dominating the trenches as always with several multi-sacks games. He's like a presence around the field, whether it's getting to the quarterback or stopping the run. He's a force, man. He is a force. And he played every single game this season for the Steelers for the first time since 2019, with the exception of their one playoff game because he went down with the MCL sprain early in the season finale in Baltimore. And when he did miss that game in Buffalo, you could really tell the defense really missed him in that wild card game. Meanwhile, you had on the offensive side of the ball, you had another strong season from second-year receiver George Pickens. As the top target for Pickett, George Pickens had another big year with his effective route running, his speed on the field. He had his first ever 1,000-yard season. And staying on the offense, he actually had a decent two-headed running attack of Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. Now, Najee Harris, his production has dipped a little bit since his rookie year, but having Jaylen Warren beside him, they were the driving force of the Steelers offense. And while they had some troubles protecting the football, still decent production on the ground and for Jaylen Warren in receiving. But the problem for the Steelers, though, it is the offense. Because of that two-head rushing attack they were so reliant on, the offense was very stagnant in hell. Like, they were, that rushing attack, relying on George Pickens, those were drawbacks. Those were drawbacks because that's all the Steelers could muster. As a result, they often found themselves in some either very uninspiring wins or losses. And I get it. It's not always about style points in sports, but it's still a team sport. You got to find a way to get everyone involved on offense, not just one player, like George Pickens or like Najee Harris or Jaylen Warren or whatnot. But it's still a team sport. The offense was very inconsistent in trying to get everyone involved. And a major problem of that came from the lack of creative play calling from their offensive coordinator, Matt Canada. We blame Canada. We blamed Canada since week 1. That's how the South Park song went, right? But anyway, Matt Canada was a very bad play caller for the Steelers. He's been around there since a while now, but he came under intense scrutiny to the point where he was eventually fired by week 11. And his replacement was not really that much different either. He was still kind of poor. And Kenny Pickett or any quarterback for that matter was kind of inefficient under center. While yes, it didn't help by having a pretty bad offensive coordinator that they were that inept. Kenny Pickett struggled. He struggled in his second year, reading the field, trying too hard to force passes where it shouldn't have been thrown, which resulted in a lot of turnovers. But Kenny Pickett, he did not develop as the Steelers were hoping for in year 2. It also didn't help the offensive line was kind of iffy in protection. And Kenny Pickett, he also had some trouble again staying healthy. Last year, it was the concussions. And this year, he suffered a rib injury mid-game against Jacksonville. And then a high ankle sprain against Arizona that resulted in surgery, which both led to his demotion to being a third-string quarterback, even when he got healthy. But even then, it's like after Pickett got hurt in week 13, Mike Tomlin elected to go with Mitch Trubisky again as starter for the rest of the season. But then Mitch Trubisky was so ineffective that he cost the team 2 winnable games against the Patriots, especially, and then on a Saturday night against the Colts, and that forced Mike Tomlin's hand to bench him for longtime backup Mason Rudolph. Now, Mason Rudolph, he was slightly better than Pickett and Trubisky, but that's no surprise because Mason Rudolph's been there since 2018, 2019. So he's had starting experience since 2019 when he had to fill in for the whole season when Big Ben got injured. But it's not saying much. We've seen how Kenny Pickett does. Not Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph does. And it's not really much. It's a slight improvement, but he has his limitations. And then going back to that defense, they did make the first round of the playoffs. They were the 7th seed, but they were missing a key piece, and it showed. Going back to that defense, T.J. Watt, they struggled against Josh Allen and the Bills. They allowed 21 first half points against them. No sacks from the Steelers. Now, although they did better in the second half, but mainly that was in part to the Bills really letting them stay around in the game. They still played serious enough and effectively that led to their elimination. So the Steelers finished 10-7. They were once again one and done in the playoffs. So, I mean, they had another non-losing season under Mike Tomlin. They broke a record. They became the first team to have 20 consecutive non-losing seasons. But I mean, it wasn't a particularly rewarding one. Once again, they got one and done in the playoffs. So not only that, it also left the Steelers in serious quarterback limbo because, well, Kenny Pickett wasn't really reliable again. And, well, your other quarterback options are not reliable either. So you had these questions about Kenny Pickett. Can you really rely on him to stay, not just stay healthy, but play decently in your team? So when you look at this offseason going for the Steelers, heading in, you had to figure that out. You had around $9 million to spend, so not a whole lot. If you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, you had to do something to create some cap space, even more cap space for them. And you're picking 20th overall, so even if you want to pick another quarterback, not going to happen if you're Pittsburgh. So looking at some of your key free agents before free agency started, Mason Rudolph, the backup quarterback that got you into the playoffs, kinda. Unfortunately for them, he signed on with the Titans. So he's on a new team for the first time in a while. And then corner Levi Wallace. So fortunately for the Steelers, they didn't have too many pressing needs, too many pressing in-house free agents in the free agency period. So looking at some of the moves that they already made, oh boy, probably the most interesting one so far of not just their free agency, but all of free agency, was signing for recently released Broncos quarterback Russell Wilson to a 1-year deal. So yeah, they decided to get Russell Wilson, who just got released from the Broncos. The Broncos still owe $39 million, and then the Steelers signed Wilson on for just $1 million. Yeah, no joke. Let's see how that pans out. But I imagine it won't go so well. And then you have, because of this, Kenny Pickett was so upset. He didn't take it so well. So the Steelers decided to ship him off to the other side of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. They traded him away to the Philadelphia Eagles for a 4th-round pick. And then they weren't done yet at quarterback because they decided to, you know what? We're going to double up on the quarterback position because we're going to trade for Justin Fields. And they didn't even have to give up much in return. All they had to give away was a conditional 6th-round pick that turns into a 4th-round pick based on the playing time that Justin Fields get. So they fleeced the Bears. They fleeced Ryan Poles. Oh, King Poles at the Mario Soul. Oh, come fleece me. So they get Justin Fields from the Bears, and well, at least it makes it interesting. You get a quarterback competition this offseason, but man, they fleeced 2 teams. They fleeced 2 teams out of their quarterback. You get money and a draft pick. Like, holy hell. That's Chicago Broncos football, baby. Oh, that's the Steeler way. So anyway, looking at some of the other moves that they made, they traded for Panthers corner Dante Jackson. So that kind of fills that corner need that Levi Wallace leaves behind. They also gave away they also got a 6th-round pick in return for receivers. So that they're not out of the blue quite yet. They had to give away Deontay Johnson and a 7th-round pick. So kind of the pressing need there. In terms of free agency, though, they signed Ravens linebacker Patrick Queen to a 3-year deal, and they signed safety Deshaun Elliott to a 2-year deal. So looking at some of the needs that they still have to address this offseason, they got to address both of their lines on both sides of the ball. So offensive line and defensive line, because they struggled at varying degrees on the offensive line and the defensive line. In terms of the offensive line, they have to upgrade at tackle and center. Because respective starters, Dan Moore and Mason Cole, Cole ended up getting released. They were big weak links on that side of the line. So they got to find some upgrades there. Defensively, like I said, it was well apparent that without TJ Watt, there's no pass rush. And Cam Hayward in the interior, he's getting older, and he had a down year dealing with a groin injury that kept him out for half of the season. So they need to get them some help. Like, seriously. Meanwhile, you need to get another receiver if you're Pittsburgh, because the Steelers basically have no one. They just traded away Deontay Johnson to the Panthers to get Dante Jackson. So they have no receivers behind their top man in George Pickens. And you can't go into a training camp war between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields when there's nobody to throw to besides George Pickens and, oh, I forgot, tight end Pat Freiermuth. So they need to use a good amount of their draft assets to get some receivers around the quarterback, namely like 3 receivers. So for the Steelers, yeah, you got another playoff appearance and another non-losing season for Mike Tomlin. But that's the case of the status quo. That's just basically your status quo. Be good enough, but not great to win when it matters most. In other words, mediocrity for the Black and Gold Brigade. But this offseason is shaping up to be at least a very interesting one in quite some time since, the days of our Steelers, to quote the tree, as the impending battle between 2 outcast quarterbacks loom large in the steel city of the Black and Gold.